We're live. Hey guys, we're going to be working on a 2015 MacBook Air today. Today we're just going to be going over how to put everything back together. I thought I'd do a quick video and show you how this is done. This is from one of the jobs that I had done today, where I replaced a tantalum capacitor on this board. We'll be putting the logic board in, as well as the dcin board, the Wi-Fi airport card, and the SSD. Okay, so straight into it. So the first thing we're going to start off with is the logic board. So just to show you the logic board that I was working on today, and the tantalum capacitor that was replaced, that one there. So this one is different to the rest of them. They should be all the same. This has got a NED AV7 on it, and that should be the same as this one here. So this is off a different computer, and it's been through the ultrasonic machine, and I'm hoping that the repair was successful. I'm pretty sure it was. Okay, so logic board. We'll spin this around this way so it's a bit easier to see. First thing we want to do is we want to get the heatsink, which is that thing there. And we want to clean off this gunk, this old thermal paste that's on here. Focus, there we go. And I just use a cotton bud and I just wipe it. It's quite dry and crusty, so try not to get it back in the computer. This customer is going to have no idea what work has been done on their computer. They're just going to know that it's been fixed, and that's okay with me. They're not going to see all of their hard work that's gone into fixing this, and they won't know that it's been inside an oven for 4 hours. They won't know that that the board has been in an ultrasonic cleaner. They'll just know that it's going to be working better than what it was before. So we get some thermal paste and we just apply it to this part of the CPU. And then we just put a little bit on the actual heatsink itself. So we're wanting to create a bond between the heatsink and the CPU. That way it's going to have it's going to be thermally conductive and able to pass heat through to the metal of the heatsink and then transfer it back to the case, which is how thermal conductivity works. Okay, so we'll put that back there, and what we want to do is we want to get the 4 screws for the heatsink. Lay the heatsink over the top, just like that. And then we'll get the 4 screws for the heatsink. Now the 4 screws for the heatsink are quite unique. So we've got these 4 small screws here. We've also got this other small screw here. We've got these larger screws. We've got one particular screw that's got a bigger head to it. Well, you can just tell that there's a bigger head compared to this one here. So this has got quite a fat head, and that goes in a particular place on the board. And then we've got the other screws for the battery. So for the battery we've got 3 longer screws and 2 smaller screws. Now these these two smaller screws are quite similar to the screw that's over here, which is for the heatsink itself. So you got one screw that holds the heatsink down to the actual board, and then 4 screws that hold the heatsink onto the actual logic board. So we'll start off with these 4 screws here for the logic board. 1, 2, 3, 4. Sometimes the thermal paste, if you put on too much, excuse me, it'll start to seep out of the sides here. And that just tells you that there's just a little bit too much. You don't want to put on so much that it starts gunking out of the sides. It can cause some problems with other components. As an example, if it were to go on any of these capacitors, it could potentially short it to ground or to another component, and that's exactly what we don't want. So we've got our 4 screws, and they go in, and you just do them finger tight. You don't want to over tighten these because you don't want to ruin the boss that's underneath. The boss is the metal anchor. We call these bosses, and there's also one there, and there's 2 there. So the next thing we want to do is we want to set the what do you call this thing? The gasket. And basically there's a little notch right there. I'll do this under the microscope. Might be a bit easier. Okay, so that little hole there is where this part of the gasket goes. You'll see that little thing with the notch. That just slots in there like this. Like that. So it just sits in there like that. And then the other one just pops into the side, and it just sits in like that. It just sits in there. Like so. Okay. Then when we put the board in, we want to line up this little hole here. There's a little hole in the end there, and it's got to line up with this little tiny screw hole here. And that's the screw hole that I see a lot of technicians messing up. I have to admit I've done it myself a long time ago. Okay. So when we place the board in, we move this speaker here so it doesn't get caught, and then also make sure that the LCD connector doesn't get caught as well. We start from this end here, and there's a little rubber grommet just up here. Little rubber grommet. It allows you to push up in this little gap here, like so, and then it just sits down like that. You want to also make sure that these other cables are free. That's your ribbon cable for the keyboard, and also the ribbon cable for the keyboard backlight. So keyboard backlight and your keyboard. Be careful when you're putting these 2 in. It's best you do it in this orientation. Try not to put the battery in first. because your chances of wrecking it are very high. Okay, then we close that tab down, and then close this tab down here. You don't need any special tools for that. Then we put the speaker in. This would be the right side speaker. And you can just push it down with your hand, with your finger, just like so. Make sure that your two Wi-Fi cables are sticking out. If they're underneath, then good luck trying to get them out once you've screwed it down. Next thing is to put in your LCD connector. That just sticks in there, and then you've got a little clip. You just push that down. You'll feel it click. Okay. One thing to note is that you want to always make sure that your holes are lining up. If they're not lining up, then something is crooked or something hasn't clipped in properly. Okay, this is where I like to put one screw in, and that's just to keep it steady. You don't want to anchor it all the way down. Okay. Now the next thing we want to put in is the dcin board, and this is what provides power to your MacBook. So your charger plugs into this, gives you power. Here's your USB and your audio jack. Okay, when putting this one in, you've got to make sure that these cables are not in the way, and this ribbon cable, and it just pops in like this. So that's upside down. Just pops in like this, like so. Then the next part is your camera. Here's your camera connector, and this hooks underneath. It goes into this little slot here, and it just goes underneath. You can use something to push it underneath that just a little bit, and then you line up your wireless camera connector. Just use some tweezers or your fingernail to get that in. And you leave this one unplugged because you want to put the battery in before that's done. So the next screw we want to put in is this very small one. That one there, and that one goes. That one's for the heatsink. That little tiny screw that's hidden just behind here. So that's the next one to go in. Just like so. Then we can get our fan, and the fan tucks underneath the rubber gasket. That's what it's called, a rubber gasket. Then we can put in the connector for the fan, which is this one here. So much harder doing this on camera. Because you really want to see all the angles. That rubber gasket gets lifted up like so. Okay, the next one that goes on is the fat screw, the screw with the fat top. There's only one of these on a MacBook Air, and that goes into the fan on the dcin side. So we screw that down, make sure that's all lined up nicely. Then we get the other screw for the fan down the bottom. And that screws in there. And then we can put in the power connector. There's the dcin power connector. Then this just tucks in here. I can tell you that I've done this thousands of times, and if it's not done in this particular way, you'll have trouble. The next one is the other side of the fan, the screw here, and this is a small screw. Now the only two small screws that are left are the two that are for the fan. Okay, next thing we want to do is put in I think this is the battery indicator on the dcin side, and then just close that tab down like so. Then this one here is your left side speaker, and just push that into that connector like so. And then there's some adhesive that runs along this line here, and your cable just sticks to that. Now we fasten the dcin board down. There's only one screw holding the dcin board. Two, sorry. And this is the main one. Okay. Now the next thing we want to put on is the dcin ribbon cable, or the dcin flex. We'll quickly inspect that just to make sure there's nothing wrong. So that looks good. And that looks good also. Now our dcin flex goes in this way, and it doesn't matter which side you put in first, and it just clips down, and then the other side, just try to feel, you'll feel it wiggle into place, and then just press it down. Then that one's in. Okay, next thing is your SSD. SSD just snaps in. Just make sure you get it the right way. It'll only go in one way. And those screws are these two fat, short ones, short and fat screws. Okay, one for your SSD, and the other one is for the Wi-Fi card. And for some reason, oh, there we are, we're back. Okay, don't know what happened there. Anyway, we get our Wi-Fi card. That slots into its spot here, like so. We get the other fat screw, and that goes in here. Next, I like to do the the Wi-Fi connectors, and they can be a pain to do. So I use a microscope for almost everything now. I've become quite reliant on it. Okay, so they'll only go in one orientation anyway because one's longer than the other. So you'll feel it go into place there. Then you just clip it down. Once you've clipped it down, you want to make sure that this part here is in its slot. And how we make sure it stays in there is we move back up to the connector and we move this out like so. And that stretches that in a position where it's not going to come loose. We get the other side. And same thing. The connector just goes and it'll just fall into place. Then you push it down and it clicks in like so. Same thing. You move this so it stretches. I can see that this has been damaged by either somebody else or it possibly happened at the factory. Okay. So the next thing is the screws. So it's time to fasten the board down. One there. One there. I remember when I first started working on Macbooks some years ago, I never had anybody to show me the proper way how to put all these screws in, and to be honest, I worked by trial and error. I made mistakes and learnt from them, had to pay for a lot of them. And the last one here. Okay, so we're nearly finished here. Next one is the battery. So the battery's done last, and the reason why we do the battery last is because these two ribbon cables sit underneath it, and it's a real pain to try to get them in there with the battery in. So battery goes in. And before we plug in the battery connector, we make sure that all the screws are down. So we're only left with 5 screws now for the inside of the board. So we've got one here, two, we've got 3 long ones, and 2 at the top, and 1 in the center. We'll fasten that down. And then the 2 smaller ones. And they go to the bottom. One there. And one here. And this is the part where I always get nervous because you just don't know if it's going to work, even though it worked before you put it into the ultrasonic machine. But in reality, putting anything into water, putting a good computer into water after you've already fixed it is a bit of a crazy idea, but it's really the only way that we can get a computer clean, back to an acceptable condition, like so. So the next thing you want to do is just power it up, see if it actually turns on. Okay, so it's turned on, and this was the one that had the bad, ouch, this is the one that had the bad tantalum capacitor. I'll just cover the customer's name. But as you can see, it's working just fine now. So we'll turn that off, make sure the power button's working. And the power button does work because it turned off. And now we're able to put on the back cover. Now, as disgusting as this looks, I'm going to clean it, and I just use one of these makeup brushes, and I'll actually brush it straight back into the bin that I use for the customer. Don't want to breathe that stuff in. I'm not going to go overboard trying to dust this thing out because I don't want to breathe that stuff in. Then I may go over it with a wipe just to try to get it as clean as possible. And then the customer will never know that we knew that they ruined their computer with water, then tried to deny it because they put rice in it. The least thing that they could have done was wipe this if they were trying to hide the fact that it was in fact liquid damaged. Like so. And now the customer's probably going to look at their computer and complain because it's so clean, and may even accuse us that it's not their computer because it didn't look like that before, and trust me, it does happen. And that's why we started recording all of our jobs. Fortunately, you don't have to see all the videos that we make. Okay, so the back case goes on. Then we switch over to our pentalobe, which is a 1.2 pentalobe screwdriver. And now we're only left with the case screws. And if you get into the habit of counting every single screw, then you're never ever left over with any. If anything, we're missing screws. But we have hundreds of these. It's just a matter of finding them. So the two long screws go in this end here, and we're just going to slightly tack those down, and this will seat the bottom case into place. Then work your way around the board, around the case. And as you're putting these screws in, you want to make sure that they're flush. So I get into a habit of putting the screw in, turning it anti-clockwise first, and then you hear it jump. You'll hear it jump. So it's actually jumping out of its socket like that, and then you turn clockwise, and then you know it's been perfectly seated. Same thing with every other screw. Hopefully this helps you if you ever want to open your MacBook Pro, MacBook Air. If you want to know where to buy these screwdrivers from, I have plenty of them, and can sell you a set from as little as $29, and that's enough screws to open and close many MacBooks, many computers of every type. Okay. And that's how you reassemble a MacBook Air or a MacBook Pro or any sort of MacBook, any sort of computer. These screwdrivers will do. Hope you've learnt something from this. If you have, please consider liking the video on YouTube or subscribing to my channel. I will try my best to get as many videos up as I can. I only have a few up at the moment, but I will get there. But in the meantime, hope you have a great evening and have a good night.